This is the Two Marketeers podcast, where hosts and marketing experts Sean Patrick and Lindsay Waugh seek to uncover what makes brands so powerful in how they impact modern society and culture.
Two Marketeers. They've got a podcast. The Two Marketeers podcast.
This is the first of a two-part episode.
Good morning.
Namaste.
Namaste to you as well.
I feel good after our conversation yesterday. Good morning, Marketeers. That's Lindsay Waugh over there.
Good morning, and Sean Patrick is somewhere over there. This goes back to how we could be in person and yet we still choose to be remote from one another.
You know,
literally somewhere over there. Doesn't matter.
Key to a thriving relationship is to know
Distance.
Good morning, Lindsay.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm actually genuinely good. It's a beautiful spring day.
Yes. Will be summer when we release this, baby.
Yeah, 2026, I think. I think it'll be June 2026.
That's a long edit.
In all seriousness, it is the end of May.
2024.
And yeah, I'm feeling really motivated today. I've more than I have in a long time. And I think I had yesterday's conversation with Lindsay to thank for it.
That was a funny one. We're like, let's talk about creativity or the deepness of human biology.
Let's talk about how important it is to be creative, or how no one will ever be creative again in marketing.
I'm like, I want to talk about craft dinner. I want to talk about creativity and human evolution. I was like, what? Why?
Am I the deep voice?
I want to talk about the end of creativity as we know it. I was like, okay, see you tomorrow.
That's why I feel so great.
Okay, why?
Well, I mean, it was triggered by us, hey, what are we going to talk about? It's getting close to the end of the season. One of us, not me, is counting down the episodes that remain.
I don't know why either. I really enjoy it. It's just, this happens twice per season. So we record September to June. This happens in January and it happens in May.
I know why.
And why, Sean? Why does it happen?
Because I think you lose your motivation.
I don't know.
But that's okay. Sorry, I'm trying to segue.
I am motivated.
But your motivation needs to shift, maybe. It needs to
Okay.
You need to remind yourself when everything gets crazy and busy and everything gets hard, you need to kind of take a break and kind of go, let me remember what it is, the things that motivate me. It doesn't mean you have to do them all the time. You need to take time and remember the things that fulfill you. Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Because I think,
True.
I mean, let's talk about the podcast. Is it a success? We said from the beginning, it's a success as long as we enjoy doing it. And it keeps challenging us to talk about things we wouldn't have opportunity to talk about in our day-to-day jobs, right?
Yeah, I would say it's majorly a success, for sure.
Exactly. Plus 6 downloads since 2021 or 2020. I mean, way to go.
Fingers crossed for 7.
Come on, number 7.
Then
we
we're
know
gonna
you're out
pop
there.
the Moet. Whatever.
Anyways, in that sort of feeling of I'll call it stuckness, we were thinking like, oh, you know what? Something we've always been a big fan of, creative effectiveness, and there's a few new reports out. It's the Cannes Lions and all these wonderful, wonderful things. And we're like, let's talk about the state of creativity. That's one of the reports. Or let's talk about, companies that use who utilize creative effectiveness and all that stuff. And it's all great. But what I started to feel like, we were talking about it yesterday, and Lindsay's like, why does it feel like we're always talking about the same thing. Like everything we see that's
Yes.
out there is the same. It's about,
Always.
it's about valuing creativity. It's about the entire process and being strategic. It's about creating a culture around creativity. And that was really, I think, the main message. Correct me if, or tell me if you think differently, of really what Warwick was saying when it comes to, if you want to be a company, like a brand that really believes in the power of creativity and adopt how you measure the impact of the creative that you do, creative effectiveness is a framework. And that's when we got to like, oh my God, another framework.
Yeah. And then we were like, effectiveness is killing creativity. And then we're like, why has the obsession with effectiveness started to kill creativity? And then we started talking about how digital gave us access to data. Data gave us access to measuring effectiveness in different ways. And so hence it was digital and data that killed creativity. And then we went down a rabbit hole of, is digital creativity and art really art? And then we went down the rabbit hole of, is AI generated art really art? And then we were like, what happened to creativity?
Wow.
I swear, people do not want to be in our status calls. It's like, how are you enjoying your coffee? What happened to the creative thinking and the human desire for creativity?
Yesterday was a big one. We usually book 30 minutes and we went over. So I think when I was trying to tie it all together, our last episode, we talked about this brilliant little idea that was craft dinner at beer stores in Ontario. And we talked about, how it's those little ideas that just seem so good. And what they create is that, it's good when it creates envy, especially for someone who is creative and strategic. It's the biggest compliment you can pay the people who worked on a campaign, is to say, wow, why didn't I think of that? Because it's just so simple and it's so well thought out. And when I saw this great campaign, it made me think, wow, I wish I could work at a place where that stuff can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized that, there's a lot of different models out there, but really what drives this kind of great ideation and executing these great and beautiful, simple things is a culture where creativity is respected among everyone.
Yeah. And then we were asking ourselves yesterday, based on that, like, what environment do you need to create for creativity to be able to thrive?
And that's that's what the report was talking about. Warwick's report was saying it's about creating a culture around creativity.
Right.
And then we were back to our
Yeah.
And we started to really talk about, okay, that's all great. Why would a report that says that automatically make businesses want to do it? Right? Like, oh, you need to adopt creative effectiveness in order to do it. And when I saw the steps involved, it's like, it's how great places always work. It's how great agencies or great companies who do great work always work. And it's about things like, putting the time up front, right? Involving the right people. It's about coming up with ideas and really testing them and measuring and improving. It's just the same thing. It's design thinking. It's human-centered design. It is innovation life cycle. It is all of these things, but why does it not seem like it's picking up?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a lot of it.
A lot of creative effectiveness or creativity, do you mean?
Culture that truly does.
Okay.
Because I experienced that. I don't know if I ever talked about that, but I was very lucky, and I do also attribute it to the time. I always got to work I got a taste of what it was like to be protected, right? As with the pressure that is on creative thinkers, and the people who the company depends on or clients depend on to actually use their creativity to solve a problem.
Hmm.
That used to be protected more, I believe. I think it was more precious, which brings us to what Lindsay was saying was, so is it data and digital that screwed it all up?
I think because creative is the subjective thing in the mix, like
Yep.
as data and digital and channels and measurement and all that stuff came forward, it was like, well, we know the media plan, we know the channels, we know how we can measure those things. And, if it wasn't any of those things that went wrong when we were trying to measure the effectiveness of a campaign, it must be the creative, because that's the only thing that we didn't feel like we could measure properly. So I think a lot of questioning at that time went into the creative. Like, is it the creative's fault that this didn't perform? Because all these other elements we feel like we can clearly see now because of
Right.
digital. Then clients started to say, like, okay, and agencies, I suppose, I guess, also would say, well, we need to then figure out how to prove the effectiveness of the creative so that we can say the creative did a good job or it didn't. And then when you try to measure the effectiveness of creative, you framework the shit out of it, right? Like, you're putting
Yeah.
so many guardrails and frameworks and measurements and like into trying to dissect the magic of creative, that then those guardrails end up informing future creative, which just doesn't enable it to have that environment to flourish. And so I think it's that kind of path. Like, we had access to see so many things. Creative was then the big thing in question. We tried to figure out how to measure the effectiveness of creative. In doing so, we have now put so many guardrails and rules and best practices around creative that we've lost the magic of how great creative comes to life.
Yeah. It's such a great word, magic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that idea, like, imagine it from a tactical standpoint, right? People think, okay, a magician can stand on stage and just do tricks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the magic is, it can go two ways. It can be seen as, well, he had mirrors, or she had sleight of hand, or they I don't know what they did, but it must have been pre-planned. What it does is it creates for those people a lack of belief that it's happening, right?
Right.
For other people, they just enjoy the show, right?
Yeah.
And the idea, and good magicians put more theater and more bigger thinking around, how can I surprise and delight? It's no longer the tactical tricks, it's about the entire experience. And I think
Mm.
the thing I'll connect to magic is, I believe that creativity is an emotional experience. For someone who, when I do my best work, I don't even know where it comes from, but it is this forward motion. It is fearless. It's okay to not get it right. Whatever it is, it's this energy. And I think when you talk about outcomes all the time and optimizing outcomes and their effectiveness, it completely counteracts the motivation of people who love to create.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you see really great creative, you're like, it is an empathetic, emotional experience that connects with the human spirit, from like a human who created it to a human who is experiencing it. And that's where you can't prove that, but that must be what's happening. Like, it must be what's happening. We were talking about this yesterday. When you walk through a museum and you're in front of a painting, you can feel, when you see something that like you really resonate with, you can feel like the emotional experience of what would have gone into that, and the story being told, and like all of that. And then our big question yesterday as well, why do we have so many questions yesterday? We were contemplating our lives yesterday, was then you think about things like efficiency and timelines and budgets and the economy and the state of work and AI. Yeah, and AI, and like, are we eventually just going to be efficient human robots consuming robot designed creative with a lack of motivation and fulfillment that is just then going to leave people being like, what happened to the creative human spirit? We need to put wine in our coffee cups right now.
But this is unacceptable. It's fine to inform them, but are you continuing to motivate them in ways where they're always improving, where they're thriving versus surviving? And I think where we ended up yesterday, it was this, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then I'll go into it if you feel.
Yeah.
The idea is there's levels of achievement that humans get to, starting at the bottom, which is physiological, right? Shelter, food, what I need to truly survive. Once you have the idea behind it is once you have that in place, as humans, we then seek something greater. The next thing up would be safety, right? Like, how do I ensure I have food for a longer period of time? How do I protect myself from the things that I need to survive? And then it keeps moving up. And then we become really focused on social, right? We connect with other people. Once we know those things are protected, we begin to go outward and connect. It goes up to esteem, which is next. Once I really feel like I have connections with other humans, I then start to care about how I feel about myself and how others perceive me. And then at the top is this thing called self-actualization. There's a reason I'm giving you these details. Self-actualization, which is once you've achieved all these things, you feel like you belong, you're connected with great people. All of a sudden, the next thing is that's when you start to think creatively. The whole theory of it is creativity comes from the top of the pyramid. Bottom of the pyramid is about survival. By the time you get to the top, it's about thriving. And you need to thrive to be your most creative self.
Yeah.
I feel like I used to be in environments where I was, it wasn't always perfect, but essentially the idea was, how do we allow the people who are responsible to truly solve the problem to really feel good and motivated to do it the best way in the best circumstances? I feel like when I read all this stuff about, whether it's Scott Galloway saying marketing is not going to be a great place to be, no one's investing in that stuff, maybe it's true, but think of the damage we're doing on the work itself when you have people who do best by thriving in an environment of survival.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like such an important point, because when we go back to the things like time pressure, budgets, economy, blah, 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 it's like forced those businesses in marketing and advertising to be in that survival mode. And yet, like you spoke about, you're expecting the people within the environment to be thriving and working in their best way, to be their most creative selves. And yet we are all fighting for this basic need of survival and safety psychologically. And so how do creative people transcend that and get to a place of thriving? And then what does, like you said, what does that do to the work that is produced from a state of survival?
Yes.
And how can it be the most effective or the most impressive in that environment? Which is then you start to compare it to things like AI work and stuff like that that's mediocre. And it's like, are we just forcing people into these mediocre environments, whether it's humans who are in this survival mode and having to be creative within a survival mode, or whether it's machines who are producing mediocre work as it is, which is just covering the industry in this like blanket of mediocrity? Because how are you able to survive or thrive or rise above that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that actually goes back to your point that you said right before we hopped on here of get out of my boat. So it's like get out.
Hey, so you get off of my cloud.
Was in those moments, sometimes you have to do what you have to save yourself, to rise above.
You have to save yourself first.
That's right. And that's a bit of like the freelance breaking of the handcuffs. Like if I can't thrive in this environment and I still love my job and I love what I do, how do I create my own environment where I am able to thrive, to rise up through my hierarchy of needs, to be able to get to a place where I can be my best creative thinker? And for us, I think it's been a lot of going out on our own, still working with and in the environments of the people that we love, but prioritizing our own needs in a different way so that we can feel like we can do our best work. And then Sean was saying over the last couple of years, it feels like everyone's gotten in the boat.
Everyone's stepping on our turf.
Everyone's on your ship and you're like, get out of here.
Yeah.
But it's true. It makes so much sense. Like, in order to get to your best self, you need to prioritize your own needs. And sometimes that means creating your own environment to thrive.
Hey, marketeers. That brings us to the end of part 1. You're not going to want to miss part 2, where Lindsay and I pick up where we left off and continue the conversation. Stay tuned, and we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Two Marketeers podcast. New episodes launch every 2 weeks.
Find the Two Marketeers podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you like to listen. And be sure to rate and subscribe.
Listen on our website, thetwomarketeers.ca, or you can ask Alexa to play the Two Marketeers podcast.
Want to keep in touch? Follow the Two Marketeers on LinkedIn or at Two Marketeers on TikTok. We've always got something to share.
This podcast is over.